Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. Today, we continue to discuss ongoing geopolitical developments surrounding Iran and the impact it has on Armenia and the Caucasus. And for this, we are going to have with us Dr. Pietro Shakarian, who is a historian of Russia and the Soviet Union and a lecturer in history at the American University of Armenia in Yerevan. Pietro, happy 2026, and welcome back to the Groong podcast.
Asbed Hovik, it's wonderful to be here. Happy 2026, and Merry Armenian Christmas to you. And I don't know what else to say. Shnor Havor Amanor.
Thank you very much.
Merci.
I think for the period of 8 days after January 6th, we are supposed to say that. So,
yeah,
Pietro, recently you authored an article in James Carden's Realist Review Substack analyzing the Russian-Iranian relations 1 year after the comprehensive strategic partnership that was signed almost about a year ago in January 17.
Well, actually, just to clarify, too, I mean, this was kind of like an article that was discussing developments since that comprehensive strategic treaty had been signed. So it was like building on that.
Well, it's interesting because shortly after your article was published, unrest started in Iran. There is a lot of debate whether that was, organic unrest or externally triggered. But what we know so far is that hundreds of people are reported to have died. And we don't know more details because the internet in Iran has been shut off because I guess there's suspicion of external influence and through the internet. Anyway, the hero from the West who support the protests in Iran is Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son, who was just a young kid when he left Iran, but there is now a strong vocal support among the neocon community and Mossad to bring him back to rule Iran. They're openly boasting about it and about the unrest and about their role in the unrest. Anyway, Trump has not been neutral in this issue as well. He publicly goaded the protesters to keep protesting, take over your institutions. Imagine a leader of one country saying that to protesters in another country, especially someone who doesn't claim to support foreign intervention.
Just imagine if Ali Khamenei was taking on to Twitter and telling Trump to stop killing his people on the streets of Minnesota, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's surreal, It's
referring
surreal.
to the ICE raids and just basically saying that if you don't stop killing your people in the streets, then we are going to bomb Washington.
Yeah, locked and loaded, man. I mean that's what's.
I mean that was down. Yeah. He promised that help is on the way, locked and loaded. To top it all off, he announced a 25% tariff on any country that does business with Iran.
Which would include Armenia, of course.
I mean, and Iran is a significant, I think 25 or 30% of Armenia's external traffic in terms of products, exports, goes through Iran. Meanwhile, Trump allies like Senator Lindsey Graham have publicly warned Iran's government to stop killing the people or Trump will kill Ayatollah Khamenei. That's what he said. So things are not looking good, to say the least. And I'm jesting because that's the only thing I can do at this point. But obviously, we're very worried. And if the U.S. is entering the picture and warning to kill Iran's supreme leader, chances are good that Iran will turn to Russia and China for assistance, we hope. So to begin with, Pietro, what is your stance on what's going on? Is this organic, opportunistic, externally curated, or all of the above, the protests, I mean?
Well, first of all, Hovik, I want to congratulate you on such a brilliant impression of Lindsey Graham. That was just stupendous. So I just want to put that out there right away. But on terms of the Iranian protests, in terms of what we're seeing, that really these protests began endogenously, right, in response to the severe economic situation that Iran was facing. Now, we also should highlight the fact that why were they facing such a severe situation? Well, they were already, as we know, under severe sanction for many, many decades. So this is not necessarily a new thing. But it seems as if the United States, under Trump, basically kind of tried to kind of manufacture a crisis by manipulating the currency to kind of go down to kind of encourage this unrest. So there were people who, like, especially when we talk about the initial protests, there were people who are concerned, legitimately so, about losing their livelihoods. People from the bazaars, the bazaris, they were up in arms about, the economic situation. But then what happened is you began to have infiltration of these very legitimate protests by radical, extreme, I guess you could say, rioters. You can't even really say they were protesters. They were rioters who were kind of conducting violence. I mean, these were people who were, that they killed over 100 police officers. They were shooting people. They burned people in a mosque. They burned, people. They attacked people in hospitals. Just really terrible things. So when the mainstream media says that these are peaceful protesters, the rioters, that is, and that's who they mean. They're not really talking about the initial protesters. They're talking more about the rioters. That's completely false. And also, moreover, as you alluded to in your introduction, Mossad overtly played a role in this. So on Twitter, and this is not just like me, just saying this off the cuff. This is actually what they admitted. So on Twitter, on a Persian language Twitter account, or X, as might also be known. By the way, Elon Musk has made no secret of his support for what we're seeing now in Iran. Okay, so X has been completely marshaled to kind of help facilitate these demonstrations, for freedom and democracy as it's been billed to us. But anyway. You have these extraordinarily violent protests, and the Iranian government shut down the internet. There was a very brutal crackdown. And then after that, what happened is once the Iranian government got the situation under control, you actually had large rallies across the country that were actually in support of the Islamic Republic, actually, as a matter of fact. So that's also quite interesting. It shows that because many people didn't like this. Many people, even people who might have legitimately approved of the protests to begin with, they didn't like the fact that they were seeing people getting attacked or burned or shot or anything like this. There was even, as far as I know, based on my information, one Armenian actually who died in these protests, in these riots. Really, we're talking about. Also, there has been much exaggeration about the scope of the oppositional protests in the West. So a lot of people say these are the largest protests since 1979. Well, that's very questionable. First of all, these riots largely took place at night, not during the day. So it was hard to gauge what the scope of them, how large they were, the size of them, the scope and the size of them. It was hard to gauge that. Versus, let's say, in 2009, when you look at the Green Movement led by Mr. Mousavi, I mean, really, in Iran, where basically where you could see that this was a movement that had substantial following in the country. To say nothing of what happened in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution. And so what we're seeing now really is a situation where it was obvious that there was some sort of effort to kind of foment, I guess you could say, a kind of a Maidan in Iran. Really, that's what we're looking at, not just a color revolution, but a Maidan, where violence would be used to kind of, facilitate an overthrow of the government. And also, as we know, external actors were involved, certainly Mossad, but also the United States. So the Iranian intelligence said that they found weapons that were from the United States in the residences of some of these rioters. They found audio recording that Araghchi made a statement where he said that they found audio recording that went back to Washington that basically was saying that, that was instructing the rioters to kind of, attack people and shoot people in order to give Trump a pretext to get involved, right? Which would connect directly to his tweet that he would get locked and loaded and get involved if Iran were to shoot
I mean,
or attack any of these protesters. So
yeah.
that's what we're at right now with this.
I mean,
So
the instructions seem almost like redundant because, I mean, where did all these people get these guns? Where did they get their training? So it definitely seems to be externally instigated, and Iran is a big country. It has a very long border, so I understand that. But I guess it's very easy, especially if you're trying to foment a revolution, to implant these elements into your society and then use them at an opportune time. But I wanted to ask you, what is your thought about the role of social media in all of this? Because I'm from a Western country, and I grew up in the US, and I grew up when the internet just started, and I can't imagine not having internet. But it seems like in Iran, internet has been very well co-opted to foment these revolutions, despite the positive aspects of it as well. Um, when Elon Musk initially took over Twitter, a lot of people had goodwill towards him. They thought he was doing this for the benefit of freedom of expression and freedom of speech. But now, you read more, and then you see like Starlink coming online, and the U.S. military inking, very large, contracts with Starlink to use that for military purposes. And now we're seeing, Twitter or X, which is also overtly being used for this revolution, or I don't know what to call it, like a externally funded regime change operation, where Twitter, I mean, unilaterally decided to change the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the flag of the previous Shah, which is the sun and the lion flag. And I think that's still like, that was a permanent change, it appears to me. So what do you think about the use and co-option of the internet in these circumstances? I mean, in general, I think also, like, what if they decide to do this in Russia or China? I think China is a little more protected, but I don't know about Russia. What are your
well,
thoughts?
what I think is quite incredible about this is the degree to which this revolution, or this really these riots, because it didn't grow. We also have to understand something else, that it did not, despite all the rhetoric we're hearing, and even despite the efforts to kind of make Reza Pahlavi, this great hero, which is really a joke, because very few people in Iran, even within even the Iranian diaspora, he doesn't have that big of a following in general. And so but what's really quite interesting to me is to see the ways in which this kind of effort to represent this as a kind of a kind of a major revolution in Iran, the
A
largest
popular
revolution we've
movement.
seen, a popular movement, the largest revolution we've seen since 1979, the largest, mass movement we've seen since 1979. And again, not to say anything about, let's say, the women life freedom movement, or Mousavi in the Green Revolution in 2009. No, the idea would be that this is the largest demonstration we've seen since 1979, even. So there's been a very tenacious, I would use that term, tenacious and concerted effort, really, to sell this idea to the Western public in particular, that Iran is on the verge of a collapse, that the state is that the Islamic Republic is weak, that the government is going to fall, and that there is going to be a revolution. And now, first of all, number one, it's misleading to think that. But there seems to be, again, this idea that is supported by Trump, by Elon Musk, by certainly the neocons, and certainly also, as we know, Israel, to kind of create this image of an Iran that is vulnerable, that's on the verge of collapse and whatnot. And the thing is, that's what's so incredible to me, is even after Iraq, even after Libya, even after Syria, even after all these regime change wars, which people watched in real time online, they saw all this unfold, and then the truth of these wars every time came out. That even after all this, there still is this effort to try and sell, to use the internet and to use social media to sell this idea that this is a popular movement, this is a mass movement, that's for freedom and democracy and all this and that
Yeah.
to Western audiences. It's incredible to me that this kind of just continues, and there's no letting up on it. And it's very tenacious. They really, really want this to happen. They really, really want to break Iran as a state. They really want to, like I say, the idea is not necessarily regime change, but regime removal, to make Iran into like another Syria, where it's kind of semi-Balkanized and so weak that it can't pull itself together, and that it would enable Israel to be kind of the preeminent military force in the region. But as I'm also going to describe, this also has implications for BRICS, because Iran, as I also mentioned, is an important node between Russia and China. And if it's severely weakened, or if it becomes another Syria, that's a huge blow to BRICS and the rise of multipolarity in the world.
Yeah, I mean, just we will go into all of that, but I think just to put a bookend on this topic, I think that more and more, despite growing up in the days of when internet was completely free without any firewalls or blocked access, I have less and less belief that that type of an internet can be a reality nowadays. And here I have to give credit to Brian Berletic of the New Atlas one more time, because he's been a consistent proponent of countries that are, especially countries like Russia and China, who are being attacked in the information domain, to take control of their information space. And I think that has to be a lesson learned for all countries involved. I just don't think that, if there's an actor that is willing to use the internet, which is the U.S. advantage, they're providing the internet, but they're trying to suborn that, and they're trying to use that for taking down other countries. And I think that there is a big trade-off to be made between liberty and sovereignty.
I just want to add just one thing on that. Actually, it's very good that you brought that up, because I also actually am of the mind that, when we talk about Armenia, look how vulnerable Armenia is. Most of the Armenian social media activity is concentrated on Facebook. So I mean, if Armenia wants to become, like, I guess you could say, independent in terms of its internet, in terms of its social media, it might think in the future about creating its own kind of like social media app or social media network or something like this, kind of like the equivalent of like, VK or Facebook, but Armenian. I mean, there might be something like that in the future, because it's really quite dangerous for any country, to be that dependent on a certain social media platform that is, externally supported.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, ever since Israel's 12-day war on Iran in June, analysts have been predicting a relapse of the war, because despite all the publicity, Israel did not achieve its main goal. So as 2026 is a midterm election year, Israel reportedly wants to deal with Iran sooner rather than later. And of course, Trita Parsi was on our show earlier, a few months ago, where he was also arguing that the more Israel waits, the more Iran can rearm itself. So that is also a driving factor. We're already seeing that these protests are being used to as a pretext for the new war, like WMD was before. Trump is basically said that, we'll see if Iran kills any of its people, then we will get involved. And then Western media immediately started amplifying the number of people dead, quoting NED funded sources, with a huge number of deaths, but that are unverifiable at this point. But Trump's threats, Pietro, are very absolute and leave very little room for de-escalation. The only question to ask is, I think, whether this will be a major attack or maybe something just a face-saving measure. But is Tehran being backed into a corner, in your opinion?
I think they definitely are being backed into a corner, and I think, unfortunately, we're in for a war, because the way in which Trump is talking, the actions, the rhetoric, everything, it's very absolute. And it would indicate to me that a war is pending. When they do things like say all Americans have to leave Iran, all Canadians have to leave Iran, all Europeans, all citizens of the EU of EU countries have to leave Iran. Once they begin talking like that, then it's just a matter of time before the war begins. Yeah. As much as we might hope that it might be a limited strike, I don't think it's going to be the case, unfortunately, with that. Trita Parsi has a good breakdown of potential scenarios of what might happen. And so you can check that out on his Substack. He's probably the best. I would recommend him as being the best commentator on Iranian affairs. So if you want to,
we can put a link to that article in our show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So check his Substack on that. But he actually was saying this is going to be a much more aggressive strike than any kind of, I guess you could say, a limited strike on Iran. There might be an effort even to do like a decapitation strike to kind of, cut off a certain element of the leadership, trying to do almost like a Venezuela in Iran, which would be much, 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 much more difficult if they attempt to do anything like this. And that's not even counting, again, we're talking about a country that, in terms of population, it's over 90 million people. By area, it's the size of Mongolia. Immense, immense diversity, ethnic diversity. We saw in these recent riots how there were efforts to kind of manipulate the Kurds against the Iranian state, against Iran's unity as a state. There have been also other attempts in the past to use other nationalities, such as Baluchis, Azeris, many others. But it was actually quite interesting because even if you looked at these protests that were in support of the government, even in the Iranian Azerbaijan province in the north, in Tabriz, you actually had mass demonstrations in support of the Islamic Republic. So it's going to be quite interesting to see, their efforts to try and kind of foment kind of this disunity in Iran, to foment like a Syria scenario in Iran. But I frankly don't think it will work. And I think that actually it could have serious repercussions on the United States, on the West. I actually see that there are many different scenarios that could unfold. It could be that Iran actually launches a preemptive strike. Because if you watch Iranian media, they're actually talking already about this idea of doing a preemptive strike on Israel. There is also, of course, the option that, if the United States is involved, they could target any number of bases, any number of American military, any amount of American
like in
military
Iraq and stuff.
Absolutely, in the Persian Gulf region.
In the Persian Gulf.
And then also there is the nuclear option of closing the Straits of Hormuz, or at least doing a selective closing that would affect Western shipping and not, let's say, Chinese shipping.
So as we're talking about this war possibly starting, I want to mention that since the 12-day war in June, Iran has been rebuilding its air defenses and missile stockpiles in anticipation of a second U.S.-Israeli attack. And China and Russia have been key suppliers of all this weaponry. Moreover, while the comprehensive strategic partnership with Russia is not a defense pact, it did include a significant defense component, and military technical cooperation has been ramping up in the last few months. In your article, you also underscore the intensification of diplomatic relations, Pietro, as highlighted by the recent foreign ministerial meeting in Moscow. Arakchi and Lavrov met in December, and there were some press releases from that. Do you think that this unrest pushes Tehran and Moscow closer together? And how do their interests start aligning in terms of perceiving common threats?
It does definitely push them much closer together. Already, we can say that actually after even during the 12-day war in June, already that pushed Iran and Russia much closer together. So actually, the Iranian parliament had not yet ratified the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty. But during the June war, in the midst of everything going on, they ratified it then. And then afterwards, then you began to see a much deeper intensification of Russian-Iranian relations, and not only in terms of the defensive sphere, but also in terms of as we can see, the diplomatic sphere. So on December 17th, as I wrote in the article, Arakchi and Lavrov met in Moscow. They basically inked a roadmap or action plan that would kind of facilitate coordination and cooperation, a deepening of cooperation between the Iranian and Russian foreign ministries for a period of 3 years. So this was actually quite significant. And also to further underscore that, Arakchi noted that, over the past 18 months, President Pezeshkian has met with Putin, 5 times. So just kind of consider that he's even said, actually, he noted that not only did they meet 5 times, but that this number is very important. He emphasized that this number, he said emphatically, this number is very, so it's emphasizing again to any of those, if you
When he
look
says
at,
this number,
yeah,
is he referring to how high that number is? For example, how many
how
times
high
they've
that
met?
number is. Yes, 5 times within 18 months is a very high number. And he's trying to emphasize that if you have any doubts about this relationship, don't, because we are very close. And that's versus, let's say, all these kind of op-eds you would see in the Western media, particularly in the British press, that try to make it sound like there's a big rift in Russo-Iranian relations and all this and that. So that's Russia. And also, in addition, I should say this, that in the end of December, early January, there were several flights of IL-76s, large Russian transport planes to Iran, to, I guess, actually to kind of bolster Iran's defenses. So the Russians already were understanding there's going to be a war. And we want to make sure Iran does not fall. We don't want a Syria in Iran. So they were already kind of helping Iran kind of prepare itself for what they perceived to be this war that was going to happen. Not only that, also the Chinese, as you also mentioned, they too are very, very keen on bolstering Iran. It's been said that the shutdown of Starlink, that actually the Iranians were able to block, access to Starlink, that this was due to the influence of the Chinese, that the Chinese assisted the Iranians on this.
That's
So,
interesting.
and these are very, very, by the way, they're very concrete ways of assistance. So we're no longer talking about kind of like, oh yes, the foreign ministry statements of condemnation and concern and all this and that. We're talking about real concrete steps that the other members of BRICS, the superpowers, China and Russia, that they're making sure Iran does not have the same fate as Syria.
So that was one of my questions as to what components of this strategic partnership between the two countries was going to become more urgent given the current riots and domestic unrest that Iran is experiencing. You're telling me that it's probably the defense sector that becomes much more prominent. What kind of aspects do you see becoming more fluid between the two countries? For example, military, industrial, drones, ISR. And when I say ISR, I'm specifically thinking about the kind of ISR that Azerbaijan was provided by Turkey and by extension NATO in its war against Artsakh in the 44-day war. Do you expect that kind of assistance to be available to Iran?
I would think so, that eventually, yes, that kind of assistance is going to be definitely available to Iran because they're going to make sure, that as much as possible, Iran does not fall. Again, why? Because Iran is a major, major node for BRICS, connecting, actually, really, if you look at it geographically, it borders both the post-Soviet republics of the Caucasus and Central Asia at the same time. It's a major, major link that connects China with Russia. That also connects not only
it's a huge country. It's double the size of Turkey.
It's double the size of Turkey, and also, you have to think that that's why this business of the North-South corridor is so important for Russia and Iran. Not only the Western corridor that we talk about with relation to Azerbaijan or the Caucasus, Armenia even has been mentioned as part of this, potentially part of this Western, element of the corridor, but also certainly in Central Asia. That would probably actually be the most reliable at this point, path for the corridor from north to south through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. But it's an enormous country, as you say, and also it provides access to the Persian Gulf, to the Indian Ocean. It's immense. So there is not the Russians and the Chinese are not going to just let Iran, face the same fate as Syria or Libya. It's definitely not going to be the case with that.
Okay.
Also, it's quite interesting because you remember what else happened subsequent to the 12-day war. Remember what happened with the Azerbaijanis in Russia in terms of the tensions between Azerbaijan and Russia. There was kind of a crackdown on Azerbaijani diaspora groups in Russia itself, as we know. And this also, it's not only that, because we also know a lot of people have analyzed this and they've looked at, the potential of, Azerbaijani diaspora being involved with maybe supporting Ukraine or being involved in criminal activities and many other things. But there's also the element, too, we cannot discount of the fact that among the Azerbaijani diaspora and among the Azerbaijani diaspora, especially elements of that diaspora that have links to the Aliyev government, there is, of course, this kind of support for the so-called Southern Azerbaijan movement, eventually irredentism on Iran to take over maybe Iranian Azerbaijan. So remember, in the Strategic Partnership Treaty, there was a clause there that Russia would not allow any organizations on its territory that would support secessionist movements in Iran. So that was also another element that we also should kind of take into account. But we will talk more about this Azerbaijani issue later on, but that's an important issue also to kind of raise.
For the moment, I have one more question. The US war hawks are often mentioning China, Russia, Iran in one breath, and they seem to be the new boogeyman for the neocons. They're the new axis of evil. What would a destabilized Iran mean for essentially this group, which is the Eurasian component of BRICS?
Oh, it would be catastrophic, Asbed. I mean, if that happened, and then not only would it be catastrophic, for the fate of BRICS and the fate of multipolarity. I mean, multipolarity is not a process that would be something that would be stopped. It might be because of this. It might be, slowed down. It might be temporarily halted in some places, but it would not be. It's impossible for the U.S. to reassert a unipolarity if a unipolarity ever existed. There are many, when you talk about the U.S. war hawks, there are many people in the Beltway, in the so-called foreign policy blob, who believe, again, that there was this great American unipolar moment in the 1990s, and that we want to preserve that as much as we can. We want to prevent the multipolar world from emerging, but the reality is now we're in that multipolar world, right? And we have, three major superpowers: the United States, China, and Russia. And we have India kind of rising as well too, although they're not quite there yet. But that's the world we live in, and so there's an effort really to kind of stop this process. But it wouldn't necessarily stop the rise of the multipolar world. But what it would do is it would cause immense suffering and chaos across Eurasia. It would leave a black hole in Eurasia. So imagine a Libya sitting right there between the Caucasus and South Asia and Central Asia and the Middle East. It would be a disaster, Asbed, if something like this occurred. So for the security of both Russia and China, they are not going to let this happen. So that's I think that for BRICS it would be a blow, and it would slow down the process of multipolarity. But multipolarity, like I said, it's going to always rise. But in terms of the strategic problems, in terms of the security issues that would arise from a destabilized Iran, from Iran that would be basically another Syria, it would be immense. It would be an immense catastrophe for the whole region, and first and foremost for the people of Iran. That's actually the greatest tragedy. That would be the greatest tragedy. There would not be this great kind of a rise, let's say, of a democratic government in Iran and all this and that. There, in fact, actually, by the way, Trita Parsi also recently posted this too. There were even commentaries on Israeli TV that even if Iran were to overthrow, even if the Iranian people were to overthrow the Islamic Republic and replace it with a government that might be more palatable to us, like let's say if, I don't know, if it were to be a complete like liberal democracy, then Israel would still bomb Iran anyway. That this commentator was saying we would still bomb Iran anyway. It doesn't matter. We just want to kind of keep, Iran in its place so it doesn't become a great power.
They
That would
have
be the idea.
some strategic goals, and they have to reach those, and it's nothing's gonna stop them from their path until they reach those things. But talking a little bit more about Russia, for 4 years now, they've been busy with the war in Ukraine, and consequently, Russia has avoided being fully active in a number of areas where its national security is at stake. Recently, however, we've seen a few signals from Moscow that is, in fact, starting to pay more attention to the South Caucasus, Central Asia, this whole TRIPP thing, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But if the US and Israel hit Iran, is Russia suddenly more tuned to this, or is it just going to be the customary diplomatic statements of concern and condemnation?
It would not be. I think that I think that again, like I said, it's not going to be it's not going to just be that they're just going to be statements of condemnation and concern. The Russians are going to get involved. They're going to help them as much as they can, not like overtly, not so much, I guess you could say vocally, but definitely in their own kind of quiet way behind the scenes to bolster the Iranian defenses, to help them out with intelligence, whatever they need. And also, again, we have to not discount the fact that first and foremost, the Iranian state itself, as we've seen with these protests, even in a period of intense economic crisis, that the government itself still enjoys legitimacy with the population, and it is still institutionally quite strong. And actually, evidence of that is the fact that if you look at like the IRGC, if you look at the army, if you look at the intelligence, of Iran, if you look at all these different sectors of the state, that they were all 100% loyal. There was no wavering there at all. And when you have 100% institutional support, it's not going to be a case where the government is going to just be, you can just like, blow and then the government would collapse like a house of cards. It's not going to be the case with this. This is not Syria. This is something else completely. And that's where actually Israel and the United States make a huge underestimation. So, like I said, Russia and China will be supporting Iran, but most of the defense of Iran is going to be done by Iran itself. It's going to be able to withstand this, and it's going to be able to retaliate in a very fierce way. We saw it in the 12-day war, how they were acting with Israel. It was Israel that went to Trump saying, look, we need to end the war because Iran is devastating us. So that's what we're looking at with this.
So how do you read recent comments by Vladimir Solovyov about what I would see as some layer of the Russian elite being fed up with color revolutions in countries and allies of Russia?
Like which ones?
Well, I mean, he was clearly indicating maybe Armenia, and right now we're having essentially a color revolution in Iran. Right? They're
Yeah,
trying to do
absolutely,
something about it.
absolutely.
So suddenly we also have Solovyov on Russian TV saying that Russia should be ready for special military operations in countries in its near abroad or the post-Soviet space.
And also you have to consider too, who else was speaking was Margarita Simonyan, who said that, Russia, we're way too passive. We have to be
Hmm.
more active, right? We're letting too much, happen under our watch. We can't be allowing we can't be allowing the weakening of our defenses across our whole Eurasian periphery to take place. We have to respond in some way. And Solovyov was basically, he was concurring with that and saying that effectively that in particular with the Caucasus, especially Armenia, which was a pillar of the Russian security in the Caucasus historically, and also with Central Asia. He said, we can't allow this, to kind of proceed, and we might even have to do a special military operation in the post-Soviet space, right? Didn't mention Armenia specifically, but he said that
Right.
maybe we would have to do a special military operation in the post-Soviet space. Well, this alarmed the Pashinyan government, and they sent a note of protest to the Russian foreign ministry shortly after this, which was kind of a little bit
I think
ridiculous.
actually the fact that they responded was more indicative of what was going on. Who
Yeah.
who is thin-skinned about this?
Absolutely,
Right?
absolutely. And also, it's very unlikely, by the way, that because Russia has a lot of options, Osbed, as disposal, especially with a country like Armenia, and they don't need to launch, let's say, an SMO. They don't even need to do that necessarily. There are other ways that can maybe influence things, but they're not going to. And I think that this was kind of like a way for the elite to kind of test out and see how would that idea of an SMO in Armenia be received by the society. But I think it was more not so much that, but I think it was more this idea of sending a warning to Pashinyan or to any government in the post-Soviet space. Look, you guys better not cross us because we mean business. So that's how I read that.
I want to actually go into a little bit about Armenia's role here in terms of color revolutions. The Iran crisis is happening right next door to Armenia, and this has been our concern throughout 2025, whether it is Armenia's external communications backbone, but the potential threat to security from any possible influx of refugees. It is a serious concern. And another reason is that Iran may get really, really, really upset. Its foreign policy red lines regarding Armenia's sovereignty over Syunik have been a key pillar, I would say, that have kept Armenia whole since 2020. It has even gone to the point of using very active displays of force against Azerbaijan to warn Azerbaijan not to invade. And now we have Iran's ambassador to Armenia today saying that Armenia is becoming a hub for anti-Iranian forces.
Yeah.
The TRIPP project as well is a key example of that. So how does this crisis in Iran affect its ability to enforce its red lines in the South Caucasus, in Armenia, regarding TRIPP, regarding the sovereignty of Armenia and the potential threat of separatism from its north that could be fueled by Turkey and Azerbaijan?
It is extraordinarily concerned about this, and it's not only the matter, like you say, about TRIPP, which already, the Iranians already regard that as being, kind of unacceptable, completely unacceptable. That the Armenian government is allowing this to happen. That they are actually forging, or at least the idea would be to have this corridor be jointly controlled by both the U.S. and Armenia. 75% of I think the company. I mean, this would be like that. Today Rubio recently Rubio was making the statements about
Today,
the specifics. Yeah, today actually, as a matter of fact, and he was basically saying that about maybe I want to say 75% of this company would be
74%. Yeah.
74% would be American owned, and the rest would be Armenian, which is really nothing. And for the Iranians, this would be a red line to invite the Americans in the region, and also that would mean Israel, of course, would not be far behind that. Also, what's very interesting is how Pashinyan is making all sorts of warm diplomatic gestures toward Israel, which seems a little bit crazy in the current context, because especially when we consider what's going on in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, again, it's like moving toward the EU. When Pashinyan says he wants to join the EU, it's like swimming against the stream of what actually is happening in the world. And the same thing we can say when he wants to get close to Israel, at a time when most of the countries in the world, is appalled by what Israel is doing to the Palestinians in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, that to move toward it seems like completely ridiculous, especially when you understand that Armenia has been hurt by Israel's support of Azerbaijan in a very, very real way. When we look at the 2020 war, when we look at the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh in 2023, that Israel was behind that. Israel, once Azerbaijan took these southern districts of Artsakh that were on the border with Iran, Israel basically established themselves there as kind of like, I guess you could say, in so-called smart villages overlooking Iranian territory.
We should also think about why we need so many international airports in a place where there are more airports than there are people.
Very, very, very perceptive, Osbed. I like your thinking. You got it. And that's the same thing when we talk about Pashinyan. It baffles the mind that these are moves that seem to be, and that's not even counting the fact that allowing opponents of the government of Iran to protest so vocally and openly in front of the Iranian embassy. It shows me that this is a government, in Yerevan that is not so concerned with the relationship with Iran. Now, it used to be before there was an effort. I mean, it wasn't really an effort, but that people would, analysts would look at this and they would say, well, Armenia, they're able to maintain the good relations with Iran, but the problems are with Russia, and all this and that. But really what we're seeing now is a pattern where both the relations with Iran and Russia, which are crucial for the security and survival of the Armenian Republic, and both of those are coming under strain under the present government of Armenia. So it's all quite important. But this TRIPP, again, it's like Trump. I make the joke that this is like Trump's tripwire in the South Caucasus, right? And so the idea is that that's what he's kind of like setting it up to be, like a tripwire for Russia and Iran, to almost like stick it to both Moscow and Tehran that we can get involved in your neighborhood, that, see not only this, we want to kick you out of your neighborhood even. But of course, when you go back to the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty that was signed on the eve of Trump's inauguration, to give extra, symbolism here for the president,
Right.
that at the end of the day, that was a message. Don't think you can do this, right? Actually, Trump should have gotten the message then. The supposedly anti-interventionist, anti-war Trump should have gotten the message from Moscow and Tehran. Don't play around in our neighborhood, right? We have in this treaty, we have specific, very, very direct. We have a direct position expressed that no external actors should get involved in the regional neighborhood of Russia and Iran, and specifically in the Caucasus. But yet Trump has, within the whole of 2025, had no problem completely flaunting that. And that actually, what's most interesting for me watching this with Trump is that we can say, how much when you watch the American media, you hear a lot of buzz about, Trump betrayed his MAGA base, this kind of a thing. It's not only that he went against his MAGA base on many issues, but in particular on this issue of war and peace, but it's also the fact that he even went so far as to really embrace the neoconservative ideology. So yes, when we look at Venezuela, he went in there for the oil. He wasn't making, it was very direct. He wasn't going to dress that up in like freedom and democracy and human rights or anything like that. But on the other hand, we look at Iran now, he's saying things like, oh, yes, I support the freedom for the Iranian people. And so he's morphing into George W. Bush. That's what I'm seeing here. Really, this is like Iraq. This is just like, Iraq to me. It's like deja vu for me, really.
Pietro, Zionists, or another name for neocons in the US, cheered at the defeat of Armenia in 2020. They cheered when Artsakh was ethnically cleansed in 2023. And US neocons, namely in the face of, let's say, Luke Coffey, who is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, have been calling for Azerbaijan to, quote, be ready when this Iran, when Iran starts to disintegrate. They were just salivating at the thought of Iran's protests getting worse. How likely do you see Azerbaijan and Turkey becoming engaged in the disintegration and the splitting up of Iran, if that, God forbid, happens?
I think that, well, of course, as we know, Turkey and Azerbaijan are quite close, but I think that their positions are actually a little bit distinct in this regard, because I don't think Turkey is for a Syrianization of Iran. I don't think they want that, because they got a taste of that already. When the Kurds became active in Iran, that became an issue for them. And they understand, well, if Iran were to fragment, let's say, along ethnic lines, that would be an issue for them in terms of Kurdistan. Now, on your program.
Yeah, but at the same time, they have a huge Turkish population in Iran as well.
I know. Well, that's what I'm about to address. Recently, Hovik, you had Eldar Mahmedov on your podcast of the Quincy Institute, and he made a very interesting post on Facebook recently where he basically said that, indeed, this is not a matter of likelihood now, that indeed, if there was a Syrianization of Iran, the government in Baku, the regime in Baku, Aliyev's regime, would get involved directly. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That according to his information coming from the Republic of Azerbaijan, that they would get involved. So, and we're talking about more than just, like we saw in the last war, where Azerbaijan would be used as like a launching pad for Israeli attacks, something like this. We're talking more like a direct involvement. That if Iran were to fragment, now again, that's assuming the Iranian government is so weak that it would fall for that it would break up along the lines of like a Syria scenario. I don't think that that's likely, but if it did happen, there are talks in Baku of taking advantage of it.
So is this exactly why Azerbaijan is arming itself to the teeth? Because we've always wondered the way that they've been rearming themselves since 2020 has probably nothing to do with Armenia, because they need like 3% or 5% of that to defeat Armenia again.
They're preparing for a much larger war.
Hmm.
Right. And they're emboldened because they saw that what happened in 2023. Well, we conquered Artsakh by force. Nobody said anything. And you know what? That this is the way you resolve conflicts, and especially nowadays, because when we look at what Trump has done with Venezuela,
Hmm.
with what he's doing with his threats toward Greenland, right?
Yeah.
And when he
And
says the
Aliyev
only
mentioned
thing
this
that
on
when
January
he well,
5th.
yeah, when he says the only thing, Osbed, he said the only thing that limits me in my power is my morality. He's told this to the New York Times, right? And that position was endorsed by Aliyev, as a matter of fact. Aliyev likes the law of the jungle. He has no use for international law. Maybe he has use in sometimes when it suits him, but in general, he has no use for it. He prefers the law of the jungle, where you can just conquer a territory, expel the population,
And he
and
has
just
no
take
use
it.
for morality either.
And he has no use for morality. So there's really nothing stopping
Yeah.
Aliyev.
I mean, even the word morality, heavily in quotes, heavily, italic. But yeah, that was a very weird statement from Trump, his own
Absolutely.
morality.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm actually seeing is that if there is a fragmentation of Iran, if there is a Syria scenario being played out in Iran, that really Azerbaijan, of course, they would take advantage of that. They would get involved. They would help foment, I guess, a kind of a breakaway Azerbaijan Republic there in the north of Iran. And so that is definitely in the cards. So while Turkey, in many respects, might not like the fragmentation of Iran because they understand, even with Syria, there's a lot of kind of buyer's remorse within the Turkish elite about Syria because the breakup of that state, de facto breakup of that state, has exposed Turkey to new security dilemmas that they didn't have before. So I think that at the end of the day, though, despite all these scenarios that we're outlining here, I think that the Iranian state is strong enough that it is going to be able to withstand this. And I think that actually this gambit of Israel and Trump, of Netanyahu and Trump, is not going to end very well. That's at least how I see it. Oh, I also want just to say this, that, I mean, you mentioned about Luke Coffey. I just want to say that to our audience, I would prefer if our audience, rather than read Luke Coffey, if you could buy a coffee for Groong and Osbed and Hovik, because that would be the best thing. This is a great podcast.
That's
Wonderful.
funny.
Yeah.
Podcast.groong.org/donate. Podcast.groong.org/donate.
That's funny.
Absolutely.
We won't edit that one out.
Yeah, keep that in. Please keep that in. Absolutely.
But obviously, I mean, the way that Luke Coffey sounds, he sounds even cheaper than the $5 fee for donating to Groong. So, yeah, I mean, to close off this topic, I'm really concerned about TRIPP being used as essentially the way that it is structured right now, especially as a platform, as a launching point for Israel and the United States and all the neocons, all the warmongers to put pressure on Iran for the foreseeable future. We talked about at least 49 years and 50 more years potentially afterwards. This seems like a dream come true for Zionists, to be honest. How do you see it? I mean, is it possible to... we had, of course, Fyodor Lukyanov on our podcast, and we all understand that Russia is currently involved in a war that is framed as an existential war for both sides. So it is a little bit limited in terms of what it can do kinetically in Armenia. But Lukyanov was very clear with us that Russia also has interests. And what happens when interests of major countries are ignored, or in fact, they are subverted in deals like this? That's my concern for TRIPP, both in terms of regional stability and also as a platform for attacking Iran in the future. Can something be done to make it more balanced, in your opinion?
Well, it will not be so balanced if a American company owns 74% of it. I mean, that right there, that would skew the possibilities of TRIPP. But I will say this, that what I think is just so outrageous about all this is how, when we talk about, I guess, the neoconservative movement in the United States or President Trump or whatever, that there's so many problems in the United States, right? We look at Minneapolis, we look at the issue with the ICE officer, right? With a woman who was shot by the ICE officer. I mean, it was just complete, I mean, it was murder. And it's just a sample of all the problems that the United States has that, the United States has to get its house in order. It has to, become a functioning republic again, right? And the problem is with all these wars, it's really it's an enormous distraction from the real problems. And actually, I have to say this is not only as somebody who is of Armenian descent, but Armenian American, it's incredibly painful for me to watch, what's happening, because at the end of the day, I mean, there's so much potential in really kind of turning the ship of the United States around. But in fact, they're just doubling down on these forever wars. That I think is kind of the most grotesque part of it. And as for something like this, it is an effort, I think, to really kind of stick it to Russia and Iran. But you were asking me, what happens when the interests of a superpower are ignored? Well, we can see. Look at Ukraine. There's your answer. Look at Georgia in 2008. There's your answer. A very bearish reaction. Just imagine, by the way, what might happen if something similar unfolded with Taiwan, with the Chinese. So you don't want to.
America's never going to take care of its problems. They're too hard, and it's a lot easier to ask and demand other people to take care of their own problems and threaten them for not doing so. So that's how we deal with it.
Unfortunately.
Hovig, when you were saying that this is Zionist dream come true, I was thinking about a motto that I've heard where they say the only way to predict the future is to invent it. So that's what's going on here. I want to finish up with one thing that happened today, as a matter of fact, because over the last few hours, the Armenian government announced that Azerbaijan has released 4 Armenian hostages previously held in Baku. They include Viken Yuljekhjan, Vagif Khachadrian, Gevorg Sujian, and David Davtyan. All of them were released to Armenian custody at Bertsor, and at least 19 of them still remain in captivity in Baku. So I wanted to know, how do you assess this move for Armenia and also for the region? And was it actually a surprise to you, Pietro? Let me answer that question for myself. We've been expecting these things to happen, and I expect that there will be a trickle of these releases all the way to the June election. But what do you think?
I think in part, I think that you have a very good sensibility, because I think part of it is intended to kind of, manipulate voters into thinking, Pashinyan, actually, he's not such a bad guy. Because right now, as I was saying on other podcasts, as we saw also recently in the most recent polls, Pashinyan's popularity is like sinking like a rock. So he needs to find something to do to kind of bolster that, right? He's even trying to appeal to youth. He's doing these kind of like, he's listening to music every morning, making the heart emoji, whatever, all this kind of crazy stuff. And even, by the way, he even did that most controversially on New Year's Eve in the light show, which was really kind of a serious violation of between the state and the ruling party and all this. And so anyway, in terms of the violation of those boundaries. But in terms of what do I think about this part of it, I believe, it serves the political interests of Nikol Pashinyan. It serves the political interests of the current ruling party of Armenia. But also, I think there was probably an element here, some agency of Syria, because we also got news that 2 Syrian jihadist mercenaries actually were released from imprisonment in Armenia.
Life imprisonment.
Life imprisonment in Armenia, and they were sent back to Syria. So it could have been a situation where Jolani called up Erdogan and said, I want these guys back. And I know they're in Yerevan. Is there anything you can do? And then, Erdogan went to Aliyev, and then this deal was negotiated. And it was also certainly, and I'm sure that the significance was not missed on Mr. Erdogan, that this would be also beneficial for us, because we would prefer Pashinyan to stay in power. So it would kind of help us. It would be our interest too.
Do you think there's any relationship of this one exchange with Iran and TRIPP or anything like that?
I think that the timing is certainly suspect, because this is all happening amidst, this growing, the coming storm of this war with Iran that we're witnessing now. I mean, and also amid the riots and everything like that, and amid the kind of, I guess you could say, failed color revolution in Iran. And so now there is this, I think. So I think it does have maybe kind of a geopolitical implication, maybe to kind of, I think, because Armenia, it's understood that by both the West and Russia, or by both specifically the United States and Russia, that to kind of bolster maybe the position of Armenia for our interests in this region. And so I think it also should be looked at it in that context, that maybe this was a move done to kind of help maybe a kind of more a government that would be more kind of critical toward Iran and Russia. So it could be that too. I don't exclude that was one of the calculations that was made in this.
I mean, I see the reports about this, the details about this trip that was just also released today. You know, it confirmed my fears about Armenia's loss of sovereignty, and I think the timing could be related to the timing of the releases could be related just to sort of mask that initial shock in the media, because we'll cover more about this trip deal in the future podcast, but it is really concerning, and I don't know how Armenia is going to get all out of this. And with regard to the prisoners, I'm glad that our boys are coming home, but many more remain back in Baku. I can only imagine what torture and torment they have suffered all this time, and the remaining ones are being subject to continuously still today. But we should remember that the fact that they were even captured as prisoners was because of Pashinyan. The fact that they were held so long as prisoners was because of Pashinyan. I'm sure that Pashinyan is elated that these hostages didn't come sooner, rather than when they were held for all these years, just so that they could be released prior to his election campaign and give him a little boost in his elections.
Well, I just also want to just add something else too. That of course, that I think that especially in terms of my own sentiments, I just want to say this to the families of those who are coming home. It's a wonderful thing. I mean, that they're finally out of this horrific captivity after all this time. But also at the same time, while we should be celebrating, while we should be happy about this, we should not look at this uncritically. And we should also look at maybe the geopolitical interests that are behind this as well. It's very important to look at that aspect of it. So yeah, I mean, absolutely everything to what Hovik said. It is. I think that this was something that was done, for maybe a political purpose.
Yeah.
I guess we'll be getting more information on that, soon enough.
Okay, let's leave it here for today, folks. Thank you, Pietro. This was an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Pietro.
Thank you, Hovik. Thank you, Azbed. It was a great pleasure to be here, guys. I always love being on your show. Thank you so much.
Talk to you again.
Thank you. Hadro.
Take care.
That's our show today, Hovik. The episode is recorded, as you said earlier, January 14, 2026. And we've been talking to our longtime colleague who's been on our show many times, Dr. Pietro Shakarian, a historian of Russia and the Soviet Union and a lecturer in history at the American University of Armenia in Yerevan. He was previously a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Historical Research at the National Research University, Higher Ed of Economics in St. Petersburg, Russia. He is the author of the book Anastas Migoyan, an Armenian reformer in Khrushchev's Kremlin, which came out back in 2025. And we've had a podcast discussing that book with him a couple of times.
All right. As Pietro says, instead of listening to Luke Coffey, just buy us a coffee. Podcast.groong.org/donate.
Thank you very much, folks. I'm Azbed Bedrosian in Los Angeles.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan in Gavar, Armenia, occupied Armenia, where it's minus 10 degrees Celsius currently. So enjoy the warm weather in LA, Azbed.
Thank you. We have 80 degrees Fahrenheit here.
Nice.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.